pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mr. Janik.
Here.
Ms. Janice Doyle.
Here.
Mr. Perkins.
Here.
Mr. Lacine.
Here.
Mr. Luchetti.
Here.
Mr. Wilkes.
Here.
Mr. Costick.
Here. Okay, we have nobody signed up for public comment, I see. So moving on. Our fantastic lacrosse teams, both of you, are all here tonight. Ladies first. Absolutely.
We'd like to present our first sectional plaque. Thank you for giving us time tonight. Lincoln Way Girls Lacrosse has been improving every year. From a program that didn't win any games 5 years ago, we only lost one regular season game last year and won a sectional championship. Even though we fell short, it was huge because it shows we can compete at a higher caliber. Lacrosse is truly the fastest growing sport nationally, and we have been able to grow the program every year. Last year we had 3 teams and 48 girls participate across the 3 high schools. As a co-op team, we have been able to build relationships between the Lincoln Way schools. Lacrosse provides more opportunities for our student athletes at Lincoln Way. Having lacrosse in our district has provided me and Caroline the opportunity to play at the next level. Due to our team's success and recognition from local newspapers, we have raised awareness to the community about lacrosse at the high school level. Thank you for adopting the lacrosse program last year. We hope that you will consider fully supporting us for the upcoming season. Thank you for your time.
Through our sectional championship win, we have been able to gain more recognition throughout our school and our peers. We also have gained more recognition throughout school through our announcements, which consistently display our game records and our scores, and also through pictures of our athletes in the hallways. With more and more girls joining each year, we would love to have the full support of the district to help us gain resources to further enhance our team and our individual skills. For example, last season we were fortunate enough to acquire 3 rebounders that our girls absolutely loved, and we could see improvement in every single girl from the beginning of the season to the end. Our parents do a lot for us, but we really would love the full support of the district behind us to help us gain these resources to help our sport continue to grow. Lacrosse is such a great sport that can offer many doors to open for colleges for each and every girl. I encourage you all to come out to one of our games this upcoming spring, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, ladies. Gentlemen.
Hello, I'm one of the captains, George Birchfield, and I'm here with some of my teammates from the Lincoln Way Varsity Boys Lacrosse team. And we are here to present our sectional championship trophy from this past season. We had an amazing season with a record of 17-5 and a 9-8 sectional win over Andrew. And 7 of our players this season received all-conference recognition.
Just a little about our background. There was no lacrosse in Lincoln Way until 2008. It was a program started by a dad and his 2 sons with 1 team of junior high kids. Now Lincoln Way Lacrosse Club has teams for boys and girls from kindergarten to 8th grade, and this is the 2nd year as an official high school sport. Off the field, many of our players volunteered at the youth lacrosse events and received scholarship athlete awards. Students from West, Central, and East became friends with kids they would never have met.
4 of our graduating seniors will be going on to play lacrosse at college level. 2 of our seniors are taking their athleticism to the Marines and the Coast Guard. Thank you to the school board, administrators, athletic directors, trainers, teachers, staff, coaches, and parents for all their hard work and support. We are very excited to present this plaque to you.
Yeah, we'll go
there's a little more space over there. Us moms, we just can't change our ways. Good job.
And we've got a student council present with us this evening from Lincoln Way West. And
Erica Johnson.
come on up, Erica.
Hi, Lincoln Way West has started off the school year very strong. Warrior Way helped to celebrate West's 10th birthday by decorating the school. While decorating, leaders put up positive and motivational quotes on every student's locker in hopes to get everyone in a good mindset for the new school year. We had our first day of school assembly outside of the stadium this year. During the assembly, we celebrated Wesley's 10th birthday by having everyone sing. Afterwards, all students and faculty members went onto the field to take a school picture. This picture recreated the one taken 10 years prior on West's first school day. During lunch hours, student council provided cookies for every student to continue celebrating the new decade. Last Friday, during all lunch hours, West hosted a recruitment fair where all clubs and activities had flyers available for students to take. This provided everyone with important information and meeting dates for activities that interest them and how to get involved. It also gave new students the opportunity to see just how much West has to offer for everyone. On Friday evening, West hosted community night to recognize and celebrate all fall sports and activities. This night previewed all the exciting things we can expect from our teams this fall season. It also gave friends and family the ability to see some teams scrimmage or perform. Student Council had its first meeting yesterday, and we are already busy planning for homecoming and other events that will take place this school year. The past years have been amazing, but this new decade for West has already been extremely successful, and we're all very eager to see what it'll bring.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, advanced placement test update. Dr. Murphy.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Tonight, I'm here to share some information with you regarding our AP program and also to celebrate some of the success on the academic side from our students on the AP exams. So from this overview here, what we have is our AP program consists of 26 different courses being taught by 80 different teachers. New for the 18-19 assessment period was the ability for our freshmen to be able to take the human geography exam due to the prep that the students received in our World History Human Geography Honors class. You will see in the upcoming slides that this contributed to the increase in students taking exams. Here what we see is an increase of total students enrolled in AP type courses, up about 400 students for this past year. And of those 6,000 students, 70% of them ended up taking an AP exam. The summary here kind of shows the total number of students enrolled in our AP classes as compared to the number of students who took an AP test. So we had over 4,000 students taking an AP test in the spring of 2019. That equates to about 70%. The chart further breaks down the results showing the number and the percentage of students who earned a 3 or better on the AP exams. Of those 70%, 68% of them earned a 3 or better on an AP exam, thus potentially earning college credit depending on the schools that they attend. Using a low number, just kind of put a ballpark number together of $1,600 per course, that equates to about $4.6 million in potential savings for students moving on into the colleges. Student success on the AP exam is further broken down by grade level. This past year, as I mentioned, was the first year in which we had a significant number of students taking the AP exam at the freshman level. The percentages represent the percentage of each class that has earned a 3 or better on at least one exam while here at Lincoln Way. So by the time they're seniors, 44% of our class has earned college credit or has earned a 3 or better on the AP exam. So 14% for our freshmen, 26 for our sophomores, 39 for our juniors, and 44 for our seniors. Quite a jump when you compare that to the class of 2018. College Board recognizes students in a number of different ways. As you can see on the chart, Lincoln Way continues to have a large number of students being recognized as AP Scholars. An AP Scholar is defined as passing a minimum of 3 exams. So taking 3 exams and earning a 3, 4, or 5 on at least 3 or more of those exams. District-wide, we had over 600 students being recognized, and that's the number that's over on the far right. This past year, we had 626 students being recognized, earning that 3, 4, or 5 on 3 or more exams. Special recognition should be given to those 18 students who earned a National AP Scholar. To earn this recognition, a student must pass 8 or more exams with a score of 4 or 5. That's quite an accomplishment over a 4-year period of time. The number next to the student's name represents the number of exams taken while here at Lincoln Way. So 18 students averaging 8, 9, 10, 11 different tests over that span. This is the 2nd year in a row in which we have had one student earn the AP International Diploma. The student earned a 3 or higher on 5 or more exams from 3 or more subject areas. Dan Delamano has earned a 3 or higher on 9 different exams from 4 different content areas: social science, world language, English, and math. AP credit is not the only way our students earn college credit. Here at Lincoln Way, we work collaboratively with JJC to provide dual credit opportunities for our students. This past year, we've had over 750 students complete a dual credit course and earn college credit. 755 completed the course with JJC. At about $1,600 a course is another $1.9 million in potential tuition earned. We continue to work with AP, Joliet Junior College, U of I, University of St. Francis, and trying providing more and more opportunities for our students to succeed and be prepared for life after Lincoln.
Thanks, Brian. Our department chairs, our administration, and the board, that's been a focus here over the last 5 to 6 years, is to continue to push our AP offerings and our percentage of students taking tests. What we're most proud of is we have more students taking tests, but our scores have remained very, very consistent, in some areas have grown. So I think outstanding growth, as you can look across the chart. We continue to get better. In fact, teachers that are AP teachers voluntarily came in a week before school started to meet with Dr. Fury, brought in College Board, and talked more about the testing that will take place this year and how those tests are going to change. We have this room completely full of teachers, one of their last days this summer, so it shows their commitment. We're looking forward to this year as well. But good work by everyone involved.
Amazing.
Amazing. Thanks, Brian. Thanks.
All right, moving on. Debt restructure. Are we ready?
Almost.
Almost. Is that your credit card number up there?
Yeah, that is a real credit card.
Bob, wherever you're more comfortable, whether you want to sit or whether you want to stand, it's up to you. It's up to you.
I'll sit. I should probably stand for it. I should sit, I'll sit.
Like you're the witness stand there.
Apologize, I have a cold and fighting off here, so my voice goes out. Actually, do you have any water? Okay. Thank you for having me here tonight. This presentation is largely an update of one that I believe, I think it was last December. And fortunately, the market, a couple of major changes since then, which I'll show you in a bit. The market's really moved in your favor and everybody's favor as far as interest rates. And the district made its way back into the investment grade category, which is one of our goals, which I know it's only one rating change, but Moody's made it very clear to us on the call that movement from non-investment grade to investment grade is really more than just one notch. There's a lot of discussion at committee level about whether to make that change or not. So getting back to investment grade category is huge for our plans going forward. And if you continue on the path that you've been on, you should continue to see that rating move upward back to where we'd like it to be, which would be somewhere in the double A category. So first slide here is a snapshot of the market going back to just after the 2001 recession precipitated by the 9/11 events. And this chart shows us a lot of information. It shows you where Fed funds rates are at. That's the gray area in the back. And it shows you where muni rates are at. The muni rates are represented by those four lines there, because when we talk about interest rates, there's not just one interest rate. There's interest rates for short-term bonds, medium-term bonds, long-term. So there's one for each year. We're only graphing here the 1, the 5, the 10, and the 20 year. So you can see after the financial crisis, lines were really far apart. You had a very steep yield curve. Short-term rates were essentially zero, close to zero. Muni rates on the short end of the curve were very close to what the Fed funds rate policy was. You can see medium long-term rates went all over the place while Fed funds policy was consistent for 7 years. So it just tells you that there's more than Federal Reserve policy that impacts medium to long-term interest rates. Most recently, as we know, the Fed have been on a track of increasing interest rates, getting the Fed funds rate above 2%. And most recently, last meeting before that, they lowered the Fed funds rate 0.25%. Many believe that they'll continue to lower it maybe a couple more times this year, driven by a variety of factors, but largely driven by the trade war and the anticipated impact it will have on the U.S. economy and the world economy, perhaps slowing down some economies entering into recession. Consequently, we've seen interest rates continue to come down. There's basically a trend that started around September, October last year, has really accelerated here of late. In the last year, interest rates have come down 120, 125 basis points in that period of time. In the last 4 months, they've come down 60 basis points. So a lot of that's just occurred here recently. So the timing then is good for us to look at potential restructuring options. This next slide is, well, the prior graph is a graph of absolute interest rates. Where are rates at a given point in time? This is more of a comparison of relative interest rates. How are muni interest rates comparable to the Treasury market, which is sort of the bellwether for interest rates, is what the 10-year Treasury is doing. And so what we do in looking at the relative, that difference between muni rates and Treasury rates, is we take the ratio of those two. We take the 10-year municipal index divided by the 10-year Treasury. Prior to tax reform, that ratio was in 90-95% range. They saw a spike there just before tax reform came into effect, because there was a lot of sales before the end of the calendar year to a ratio up. But ever since that time, you see that ratio has been hovering at lower levels, and most recently has dipped into the 70% range. So what does that exactly mean for you then? It just means relative to the Treasury market, municipal issuers can borrow at really good rates on a relative basis. So for example, if the Treasury 10-year rate is at 2%, and you're looking at a 10-year maturity, and the ratio is at 90%, you would be borrowing at 1.8%. If the ratio is at 75 to 80%, you're borrowing at 1.5 to 1.6%. According to ratio. Now, individual issuers will sell at rates higher than that, but it just gives you an idea of why this ratio is important, an important variable that we monitor in the market. If you're curious why that ratio has gone down so much, a lot of it has to do with tax reform. There's really a supply and a demand effect. Much lower municipal bond supply because tax reform eliminated tax-exempt advance refundings, which is something So if you have to do an advanced refunding, you have to do it on a taxable basis, which is something that we're trying to avoid in this plan of finance. We're going to try to do as little taxable refinancing as possible, because taxable interest rates are higher than tax exempt. The other thing that's driving this is sort of as a demand side, and that's a result of the SALT limitation. You can only deduct $10,000 of your state and local taxes, which has really hurt a lot of higher net people, with net worth people in high tax states, Illinois, New York, California, just to name a few. And so people have been looking for other shelters to put their income in, so they've been buying more municipal bonds. So the combination of those two factors have driven this ratio down.
Have the individuals offset the corporations, like banks and insurance companies? I mean, that was the concern, that they were gonna,
Right.
because they lowered corporate rates, they were gonna leave the market. Is that an offset?
Yeah, so if you think about the tug of war that changes, you're talking about the negative tug on that rope, that is that the corporate rate went from 35% down to 21%. So corporations that buy municipal bonds, like banks or casualty insurance companies, they wouldn't benefit by owning municipals that much, which all other things being equal would push muni rates up. So you're right, that's the negative effect, but these two positive effects have more than overcome that. So not only do we have rates falling on an absolute basis, we have rates even low on a relative basis.
Quick question on this graph.
Sure.
It's based off of AAA municipal bonds. Is the same correlation based on our current rating, or how would you assess that?
Well, because of your current rating, and anybody in Illinois, even the AAA rated entities in Illinois, like Kinsale, they sell above this index just because you're in Illinois.
Sorry, that wasn't
Depending on
What
the
is the spread that you,
For-
is that the 50 basis point you have in here?
No, so the spread for like a AAA, so the spread widens the worse your credit is. So Hinsale would probably be on a shorter end 25 basis points over, longer end maybe 45 basis points over. A rating like yours, it's in the BBB category, and you'd also qualify for credit enhancement. So you sell the AA rating by buying credit enhancement, your underlying, you'd probably be on the shorter end 70 basis points over, and a longer end maybe 100 basis points over this index. But still on a relative basis, you're tighter to treasuries, but you are going to be higher than treasuries because of the credit, your own individual credit issue, and then the state of Illinois credit issue.
The nature of the question was like if there was any benefit waiting for additional rate increase.
Yes, so when we look at the plan involves phasing, and so any of the plans, well, unless you do the first option, which is to do nothing this first round, just let the increase go up, but the second and third options we present have phasing, where the first phase just changes the next 2 years of levy. And kind of jumping ahead a little bit, and the reason for that is because after those first 2 years we can impact with callable bonds, which means we can refinance on a tax-exempt basis. The next 4 years, years 3, 4, 5, and 6 down the road, you're going to see in a moment on the graph that you've seen before, there's no callable bonds in those years. So anything that we do to refinance those, it would have to be on a taxable basis. So we'd like to leave that, A, for a later phase to hopefully have the resolution to the Lincoln Way North, because ideally I'd like to deal with those 4 years with cash from a sale if there is one. So by leaving that to the second phase, that gives more time for that to play out. And also, the other bonds that we refinance, that call date's a few years down the road. So by the time you get to that call date, which I think is 23, interest rates could be higher then, but you'll be able to do it on a tax-exempt basis. And hopefully by 2023, you've already found your way back into the single A category, if not the lower ranges of the double A category, which means, so not only do you get your rates, you sort of natural built-in hedges then for waiting is to be able to sell tax exempt for those bonds callable in 23, that shaves off 75 basis points to 100 basis points. And if your credit rating's higher, you'll shave off another anywhere between 30 to 50 basis points. So it's sort of natural hedge to wait and do this in a couple phases. Does that answer your question?
No.
Okay. Any other questions on the market?
Just in the do nothing, where there's the potential to refinance some of the callable bonds, and I know it's probably minimal given the short maturities, but do you have an estimate on what you know, just, so I don't think it's like do nothing. I think it would be like just refinancing those three.
Right, you put them kind of right back where they were.
Right, yeah, putting them right back where they were. If you did that, I mean, I think last time you gave us a number, it was like 316,000.
It would be probably somewhere in that range still, which is because you're only refunding one or two maturities.
It would only be two at that point.
Yeah, so you're only reducing interest by 1 year for one maturity, 2 years for the other. And that's not just for you, that'd be for anybody. When you only have one or two maturities left, there's just not a lot of opportunity to refinance it. If you like refinancing your home mortgage, you only have 2 years left, and you're not gonna save a whole lot. So, but yeah, you would be able to do that then. So really, the do nothing, when I say that, that means you're not really changing the slope of the trajectory, you would then just refinance those for savings. So let's go ahead and move into slide 6. So slide 6 is a summary of your outstanding principal by series. At the bottom of each bond series, which you have 5 of them, it tells what the original purpose was. So building bonds was for new construction. And then you have the 09 bonds, which were building bonds and advanced for funding bonds. And the other 3 maturities were just advanced for fundings, which, keep in mind, you can no longer do those under the tax code. Then we have the call date. So you're by the call date in the 09 bonds, which we knew. My recommendation before was let's go by that because we need more time to formulate the plan and to formulate the plan and hopefully improve your credit rating. Okay, we're here to formulate the plan over the next couple months and your credit rating improved. And by the way, interest rates fell during the meantime, so you probably didn't lose anything by week if you decide to just refund right to the current footprint. And then the 13A bonds were the ones that I was talking about a moment ago that are callable 1/1/23. So under the current tax code, you can't close on a refinancing until 90 days before then. So that would be roughly October 1st of 22, which means you can sell on September of 22. So that's about 3 years from now is when you could advance current refundos. Well, over 3 years, you hopefully a lot of these lingering issues have resolved. You've had a couple more, 2 or 3 more years of surpluses. Your TAWs have gotten even smaller, and then by then we hopefully would see that credit rate improvement to at least into the A category. And then the other 2 series that are uncallable, one of those is going to mature this January, so that'll be gone. And the other one, if at all possible, we don't want to touch. Just want to let that mature in its place. Because anything we do to that would be escalating things to maturity, which would just be costly. The next slide I like because it kind of shows you where your flexibility is for the various maturities. So this not only reflects principal, it reflects the interest payments on those bonds. And the maroon columns represent the 06 cabs. And this is by levy year, so you always have to do the math. So levy year would be payments due 2 years later. So for example, levy year 18 was what you collected in 19 to make payments on January 1st of 20. Levy year 19, you'll collect next year to make payments primarily on January 1st of 21. Okay? So that's why we're having a discussion now. That next summer's bills would be the ones that reflect this increase if nothing were to happen. Well, the maroon columns, there is no callable principal. So anything we do there would be escrowing bonds to maturity, which means a taxable advance refund if we do anything to touch those. The green reflects the 09 bonds, which are the callable ones, which we would either restructure in phase 1, or if you choose to do nothing, you would just refinance wherever you could for those to obtain a lower payment on those bonds in the current footprint. The light blue, I guess that's the bluish gray, that represents the non-callable payments on the 13A bonds. So it's primarily either non-callable payments or interest payments. So in those years where that blue is very short, that's just interest payments on the 13A bonds. There's no principal there to touch. So you can see in levy years 21 to 24, you either have just interest payments on one bond series or a bunch of non-callable bonds. And then in 25, you have principal payments again, but that first one's not callable of the 23 bonds, or excuse me, the 13A bonds. And then all those blue bars represent callable principal payments on those bonds, which are callable, although there's no principal due on those until 2028, they're callable in 23. That's what the timing is to refinance everything that's in the dark blue, hopefully to a lower interest rate.
With its current tax treatment, correct?
Correct. And there's always, I mean, that one, because it was an advanced refunding, even under the old tax law, we had to wait to do a current refunding, because the prior tax law only allowed one advanced refunding, now you're allowed no advanced refundings. So really, the tax law change hasn't impacted that at all. But we could have refunded maroon on a tax exempt basis if it had not been for the tax law change. Slide 8 is just the detail that flows into the graph you saw in the prior slide. So we're showing in the yellow row, that is this current year that you're levying and collecting taxes for. The 2 blue years, those are the first 2 years affected by the increase, which would be changed in the first phase of a restructuring in options 2 or 3 that we'll examine. The next 4 years in green are those are the years where there's no callable bonds. So how do we do, if we have to lower those years, how do we address it? And we've got that in the box. There's 3 things. You can do a taxable restructuring, which is we don't want to do if at all possible. You can repurchase the bonds. Now, I don't want to put a lot of hope in that because those are very difficult transactions. Repurchasing the bonds means you go out to the secondary market, to the current investors, you hire a broker dealer to do that. We're not permitted to do that as your municipal advisor, so we would work with you through the proposal process, engage a broker dealer to approach the current investors, offer some terms, that are more favorable than, let's say, a taxable restructuring, to buy those bonds back from them. Because if you buy them back from them, then it's a current funding, and anything you did to restructure them would be a tax exempt bond issue. Okay, but again, don't put a lot of hope into that because those things are. I've done it before where we've tried to do those and failed after a lot of work. I've had other times where it's been successful and it's worked, and economics work for both the investor and for the issuer. It's try to find a win-win for both parties to find something in between. And then the third one is
how do you raise the cash for that?
You would raise it through a refunding bond. It's just now.
So you can raise it. You can.
Yeah.
Those simultaneous.
Right. You simultaneously do a tax exempt refunding bond that would be used to pay them the purchase price. But that because you'd be paying them off immediately, it's within 90 days, so it's current funding. And the way you go about doing that is, like I mentioned, you can identify a lot of the current investors through Bloomberg because they have to report their certain holdings in their reportings. Can't identify all of it, but you do have to go through a formal process of them posting documents to Emma, which is a website where you talk to the market as an issuer. And you put it out there so if any other holder wants to offer the bonds back, they're given equal opportunity with the ones that are identified.
So these bonds, if you look at the average coupon on page 6.
Which bonds?
The bond we're talking about here, the CAD, the 2006 CADs. Average coupon is 9%. Does that make it, I know you're saying don't put a lot of faith in that methodology, but does that make it more likely or less likely that you'd be able to negotiate something in between that would work better for the investors? Something that is a very high end rate right now.
Well, that 9% interest rate, not to get into a lot, it's kind of an artificial number per se, because the actual, when you sold those bonds, those are caps sold, they're premium caps, so you're able to designate some of the proceeds you got as premium, some as principal by artificially setting the rate at 9%. The real yield was probably somewhere in the 5% range. So really what happens is you look at where that bond is trading today. Let's say it's trading at 70%. And funding it at a taxable refunding is more costly. It costs you like 75 cents to refinance those by investing in treasuries. So you go to them and you try to find a place somewhere in between and say, hey, we'll give you 72 cents or 73 cents. So then you're not going to fund a taxable escrow at 75, and they're getting something better in the market says bonds are right now, which is 70 cents. So the 9% doesn't play a whole lot into that. So,
But okay, just run that out for me a little bit. So based on our current investment rate, does that have a greater opportunity of success or less likelihood of success?
yeah, because now those bonds are worth more. So the price is higher today than it was before.
Right.
So it's sort of a double-edged sword then when your rating goes up. Your bonds in the secondary market are worth more, so the price went up, but your reissuance of those bonds, if you were to refund them, you're getting a better interest rate. So, you know, all things equal, you're buying short and issuing bonds long, you're obviously better off having a better credit rating, even though the cost to buy the bonds would be higher. Ideally, if there's a cash infusion from something, you're doing the third option. We would, if we have to refinance a portion of those bonds, most of those bonds we like to leave untouched. But let's say to achieve the goal, let's say objective 2 or objective 3, or something that, some other objective that we come up with in the options, that you're peeling off the top layers of those by taking some of that cash and defeasing it. So you take the cash, put it in escrow, the escrow would pay the top portion of those wherever we want it to do, and that escrow is invested in treasuries. And you're not issuing new bonds. That would be the best alternative 3. I mean, you could, I guess you could still look at a mixture of 2 and 3, because you could go back to, you might be able to go back to the investors and say, we want to buy back, or you just use the cash and pay them off. They're gone. You have to look at the relative economics of it. You know, what would be best? Option 2, paying off cash, or option 3, setting up a treasury escrow.
But the cash would come from the sale of a capital asset.
Right. But none of that would take place until phase 2, or if the sale of a capital asset occurs, you can always do it then, you know, somewhere between phase 1 or phase 2. So, but that wouldn't, nothing has to be decided right now for certain for phase 2, which would be affecting those green bars and after, okay? This description of phase 1, 2, or options 1, 2, and 3, I do have written down as soon as, actually we're gonna go into that section right now. But before we look at those options, which are updated from what we looked at back in November, the board set forth some objectives in a memo of what they would like to accomplish in any restructuring that was adopted back in April, March, April, earlier this year.
March 21st.
So, and I don't think these are listed in any sort of numerical order as far as importance. They're just listed, you know, the 7 things that were set forth. Consider all options for selling Lincoln Way North and apply the sale proceeds to the current debt before restructuring any debt once the sale does not occur prior to a significant debt milestone. So for example, if nothing happens with Lincoln Way North and you're determined to alter the levy for next summer, well then we would move ahead with doing phase 1 without necessarily having a resolution of Lincoln Way North. And then hopefully there'll be a resolution before you get to phase 2 because you have a couple more years. If something happens with Lincoln Way North prior to implementing phase 1, we could implement the use of that cash at the same time. So that's what objective 1 is about. Objective 2, no refinancing the district's credit ratings at least be A3, which is investment grade. That's completed. You just got there earlier this month. Do not issue additional 0 coupon capital appreciation bonds. Those are synonymous terms. It's not 2 different bonds. That the restructuring plans, none of them rely upon these bonds. We don't want to do any more of those. Any refinancing shall not extend the debt structure more than 3 years beyond the current schedule. So that would take you, we currently are set to mature in levy year 31. We don't want to go beyond levy year 34, 3 more years. So the scenarios we look at, none of them go beyond that.
So, on that point, we talked a lot about getting our credit rating up. Any concerns with how Moody's would, I mean, one of the things they mentioned in all the reports is, you know, the low current payment of any of our debt. I mean, is there any concern on your part of extending that out? I mean, I think we're going short. We've shortened it up. You could go 5.
Right.
We've said 3. Could go shorter. But I mean, is there any concern with this point here of 3 years that it would impact the rating?
No, we shared with them these plans and then these objectives, so they're aware of this when they moved you up. I think actually implementing a plan will be a credit positive, which unfortunately with the 2 phasing, the whole plan won't be implemented until you get 2 years down the road. But extending 3 years, that would not be impacted in a negative fashion. Focus on the total debt service dollar levy, not the debt service tax rates. Tax rates are a function of the debt levy and EAD. You know, this current debt structure was set up assuming a certain amount of EAD growth, trying to maintain a tax rate. Your district and many districts across the Chicago metropolitan area learned in the Great Recession, trying to predict the tax rate is a very perilous game to play, because anybody who did that lost. Because EADs went down while debt levies were going up, so tax rates went up a lot on debt. Unless you restructured, which is what happened a few years ago here. So by focusing on the levy, that's the one variable you have control over. You can focus on a percentage annual increase in the levy. The tax rate to pay that will be whatever it is based off what EAD does. But the thing you can control is the levy. To the extent possible, debt restructuring should be done on a tax-exempt basis. We've already sort of talked about that, trying to avoid any taxable restructuring of non-callable bonds. No debt restructuring shall be done without review and analysis how it impacts the long-term debt objectives. So we wouldn't want to, for example, do any refunding for savings without looking at, well, how does that refunding for savings impact the overall plan? It sort of goes with what we're doing here, but we wanted to get it in writing that anything that we do on a specific bond isn't done in a vacuum as to how it impacts all the other bonds. Any questions on those objectives? Okay, so slide 11, the benefits of phasing. Most of these are already covered. Many of the bonds aren't eligible for tax-exempt funding, so if you sell them taxable, the rates would be 0.75%, maybe up to 1% higher, depending on how far you go out, market conditions at the time. The Illinois premium paid by local issuers may decrease over time. We have seen that come down a bit since there was the budget agreement. And the Illinois premium paid by the state is still really high. But if their premium comes down, your premium will come down with that. And so there's always a possibility that improves over time. I don't know, there's a Bond article today that the state finally got its audit out, and the headline is something like, the state of Illinois finally gets its audit out, it's covered in red ink or something like that. So I don't want to put a lot of hope in number 2 coming down a lot, as in phases 1 and 2.
No, I mean, I think there's risk to the other way too, because if it goes, it's going to vote of the public, and if the tax, the graduated tax doesn't go through, and no one's coming up with a plan, I think it could, put Illinois behind it again, and there's no other alternative. So
yeah.
So I mean, I think it could work out, but I think there's also could work against us.
It provides more time for the district to improve its credit rating. So by the time we get to the second phase, hopefully again we've moved up 2, 3, maybe 4 notches in that time.
What, just out of curiosity, like BAA 2, just like the next notch up. I mean, what are we talking?
Interest rate differential.
Yeah, interest.
Maybe 10 basis points, 10, 15.
Is the next big step up when you get to like an A then? Basically?
Yeah. Although, I mean, the big step was getting from BA1 to BA3. And this also will lower the cost of any credit enhancement too. When your credit enhancement means you go to Build America Mutual or Assured Guarantee, and you pay a premium to them to get their AA rating. So the cost of that will come down. So it's general rule of thumb, about 10 basis points for everything you move up, except for that big jump to investment grade.
Which was approximately what?
I know we did that analysis in the last presentation, which I took out since we made it there, but I want to say it was like full 1%. Because we had just done a bond issue for North Chicago, which I think at the time was in the junk rate. I didn't work on that one, my colleague did. I think it was a junk rate. We were kind of using our experience on that and applying it later. Fourth, the provides time for districts to sell Lincoln Way North. just a general rule of thumb, for every $10 million in proceeds from the sale that's applied to reducing debt, that eliminates about $16 million of debt service. So you're eliminating principal and interest. So there's a lot of synergy there for every $10 million you get from any sale. And then
I have a question on that. You say proceeds? Is it just to say we sold 10 million? That would eliminate 16. It doesn't have to be, make a difference between, say, what is owed in the bonds versus.
Yeah, so for like every $10 million you get from the sale.
If we get 10 million, we eliminate 16.
Yes.
Okay.
Now that, it's sort of like you remember from your economics day about elasticity. The first 10 benefits you more than the last 10, because the first 10 shortens, every 10 shortens the length of term. So we kind of sort of looked at different $10 million increments and kind of took somewhere in the middle to get 16 million. So just so you know, it's not a linear sort of elasticity. Lastly, it allows the district to revisit the goals of the plan in each phase. So we could adopt a plan, later this year, implement it, come back for phase 2. You could have a different objective in mind. We can tinker with the plan a little bit. I was just working with Wheaton on their restructuring plan. We finished phase 4. Between phase 3 and phase 4, we looked at a lot of scenarios, and the final phase 4 was different than what phase 4 was in the concept plan, because at that point, new information. I mean, it was like a 5-year period over their phasing, so a lot of things changed over that period of time. So, just because you set a course and do phase 1 doesn't mean you're stuck with that course per se when you get to phase 2. So finally, we're at the options here. I'm just going to touch on these points at a higher level and just explain them as we go through the options over the next set of slides. Option 1 is where you allow that increase to occur from this levy year to the next levy year, and don't do anything until 2022, 3 years from now, when the 13A bonds are called. And at that point in time, you try to bring down the slope of the future increases, so you don't get to that peak that's in the 40-some million. At that point, we end up leveling out the payments at $30 million. You'll see it graphically in a few pages here. Option 2, we do adjust the levy for next year. So there's only one phase in option 1. Option 2 has at least a couple phases, most likely 2. The second one may be split a little bit, just based on timing. Make sure we do think as much as possible in tax exempt. Depends a little bit on proceeds from any possible sale of an asset. So in this one, in exchange for doing a $16.2 million increase, we do it in favor of $2 million annual increases until you level off at $28.5 million. In this scenario, where did $28.5 million come from? That's the number we could get to and level it off going out the 3 years fully. Okay, we couldn't go any lower than $28.5 million as far as leveling off. Otherwise, we'd have to push it out more than 3 years. So that's sort of the objective on this one is how low can we get the levy and not go out more than 3 years on the restructure. Option 3, it's similar to option 2, except it has more gradual increases, or it has initial annual increase about $2.25 million, so slightly more, and then it descends to smaller annual increases. Again, you'll see this in a moment on the graph. And that when we keep going up with the increases that don't level off as soon or at all, I can't remember exactly, I'll know in a moment when we see the graph. But we only extend the debt payments by 1.5 years in this scenario versus the 3 years. So the next slide is the graphical representation of the possible option 1. So you can see how you have the increase from 18 to 19, no change, and you continue on that same trajectory until you level off at $30 million in levy year 24 and thereafter. You only have about a 2-year extension on this one, really 1 and a part extension. So what does that increase mean then for a taxpayer? We have quantitative calculations here in a moment for a $300,000 home, but excuse me. So when your levy changes from year to year, your debt is only one component of it. Your operating side is the other component, which is a larger component of your levy. So if from levy year 18 to 19, the increase that would happen to your overall levy would be CPI, which we now know is 1.9%, plus 5.2%. So your overall levy, if you did nothing, would go up by about 7.1% next year, exclusive of new property. And then thereafter, the annual change in debt service is about 4.8%. So because the B&I levy is about 20% of the overall levy, thereafter those annual increases would be CPI plus 1%. So whatever CPI is, so CPI is 2%, your overall levy goes up 3%. Again, it's because the bond levy is only 20% of the overall levy, so we take the weighted average, it mutes the increase in the bond levy. Okay, so what does that mean to the $300,000 home? So I just want to point out, just make sure we're clear, I did this back in December, but it can be confusing for people when they examine these charts. That difference column in the far right box, we see it stays the same, it's $1, $28.64. That's not an annual year-to-year change. That's the difference from if you actually did nothing to your structure. So I'm taking the pre-restructuring impact on a $300,000 home and subtracting a post-restructuring impact on a $300,000 home. So for example, in levy year 29, if you did absolutely nothing to your debt structure, the payment on a $300,000 home would be $839 versus $663 if you restructured it, which means it'd be roughly $176 lower for a $300,000 home with the restructuring. Now, by doing nothing, now I just want to focus on those middle set of boxes. If you did nothing at $300,000 home, now we are looking at the annual change. Your bill will go up roughly $412. Then the next year will go up $558. So the debt portion of the bill, if you did nothing, would go up $146 in 1 year. And then you can look at the difference thereafter. It's going up about $30 a year, $30 to $40 a year after that. The overall change to the debt service, in this scenario, you're actually projecting that your total debt service would be higher by about $1.5 million in this sort of restructuring, which isn't a big increase, even though you're extending debt of it. And then we do various present value calculations at 1%, 2%, 3%, and you can see the impact on the discount rate you want to choose. So the next slide, possible option 2. In this one, we do mute the impact from levy year 18 to 19. It's still a larger increase than you had from levy year 17 to 18, but these are the sort of annual increases we need to achieve in order to not extend the payment more than 3 years. You can see we've added 3 columns at the end in equal amounts. So the annual increases here is roughly 8% annual increase on the bond levy until you level off at about $28.5 million. So the blended levy increases are CPI plus about 1.6% would be over the next 7 years or so. So for next year, your overall levy would go up by 3.5% in this case. Any questions on this slide? So if you implement this plan, in the first phase, we'd only be affecting levy year 19 and 20. Pardon me, levy years 19 and 20. Levy years 21 and after would be affected in phase 2 a couple years from now, hopefully when you resolve whatever happens with the asset. And keep in mind too, these structures you're seeing here are not applying any cash whatsoever. So any cash you apply can be used to do 2 things. It can be used to lower the average annual increase and also lower the ultimate levy objectives. You know, so instead of having 8% increases, maybe you have 4% increases, and you ultimately level off at 25 million or 22.5 million. You know, it obviously depends on how much cash you receive if you're able to receive it. Any can see in this one, I want to focus on the far right boxes again. By implementing this restructuring, next year's tax bills would be roughly $100 lower than they would be. They're not going down $100. They're $100 lower than they would be. They're still going to increase, but it's $100 than it would be if you did nothing. So, for example, in the restructuring, it's your debt levy this year in a $300,000 home is $412. I'm looking at the second set of boxes from the right. It would be roughly approximately, it'd be roughly $457 versus the $558. So that's where I'm taking the difference of 101. Now, in order, if you implemented this plan, the overall levy would increase by about $16.2 million over the remaining term of the bonds. On a present value basis, obviously that gets smaller because people are paying less today by deferring some to later, which we're all, I think we're all familiar with the present value concept. So it means if you're using a 3% discount rate, it's almost break even. You're about negative 1.6 million. The third option, this is the one where we never really level it off. We keep doing annual increases that never get as high as it would have been, roughly the $42 million. You end up peaking at about $34 million. So you can see initially you have some larger increase, about $2.25 million, but then the slope of those increases decline. And you get to the outer years, it gets really flat. So, so initially, the annual change is about 4.8%. So this is sort of an average. Your blended levy increases are about 1% over CPI over this term. Now it's higher at the beginning, lower at the end. But the term is only extended about 1.5 years on this one versus the other scenarios where it's extended a little further. Consequently, when you get to the next slide, the overall levy increase is 7.8 million versus the other one was in the upper teens. And a 3% present value factor actually positive. What's the impact of the taxpayer? Next year's bills will be $95 lower instead of the $101 lower. So, keep in mind, if you decide between option 2 and option 3, if you are inclined to do a restructuring, you're really only deciding to impact the next 2 levy years. You're going to have an opportunity to revisit the whole structure again when we come back for phase 2.
So I think what would be helpful, and we're scheduled to talk about this again, is this is very helpful to see these pictures, but if we could see actually phase 1, like what the decision would be.
Oh, that's in the appendix, actually.
It is. Okay.
Yeah. I believe it is. Let me flip back here. Yeah, so slide 25 is, so you see the 2019 A series, we're taking some of that orange, restructuring it, and moving out about $8 million to accomplish that.
Yeah, no, I saw I mean, what I'm talking about is the impacts.
Oh, the impact.
Yeah, like actually what you're doing. I mean, here's what we're going to be voting on. We can say like this is the plan, right? But here's truly what we're going to be implementing.
Sure.
And that's what the impact is going to be on the $300,000 house and what the net.
Yeah, so sort of show what the debt looks like after phase 1's done, where
right.
some of it's still incomplete.
Right.
Okay.
Like, I mean, obviously it's all in these first 2 years, and you're going to have a little difference there. You're still going to show all of this, but actually what we're deciding on
right
in the beginning there.
Yep, that's not a problem. Slide 19 is just a summary of some of the key variables from those summary slides that we had for each option. We're showing the change in the levy, the impact of the taxpayer on from doing nothing to doing one of those options. And so you can sort of view it on a side-by-side basis here. And again, keep in mind, none of these apply any cash whatsoever towards the restructuring. Any other questions at this point?
So I know before we said an objective to not extend more than 3 years. Based on the current rate environment, is that still prudent? I mean, you could lock in your debt at a sub 2 for an extended period of time?
I wouldn't say, for a couple reasons. You know, in the first phase, I would, maybe in the second phase, because, you know, in the first phase, if you do something, you're only moving about $8 to $10 million a month. So, but yeah, that's where
Second tranche where it's the 130 million?
Yes. Yeah, so that, you know, yield environment is similar to them. Yeah, I would perhaps, if you want to reconsider that, you know, part of it is also to consider, you know, at some point you want to eliminate the debt because you're going to have capital needs in your 3 high schools. And as those needs come up, I know you guys have been budgeting for many of those capital needs within the budget, but at some point maybe those needs get larger and you have to go to a referendum. And nobody's saying that there's going to be a referendum, but you know, maybe 10 years from now, 12 years from now, the cost of whatever improvements you need to do exceed what you can afford the operating fund. So we'd like to get to a point where you're nearing completion of the debt so that when that need comes up, you can address it without having to push off debt or restructure debt at that time to fit it in to the overall structure. Those are the types of things, when we get to phase 2, I like to make sure that we dig into, sort of gets to this, the point 7 of the objectives, is when we get to phase 2, we look at what your 5 to 10 year capital improvement plan is and identify what are your funding sources for all these improvements that you have. Can those fit in the operating budget? If they can't fit in the operating budget, should we look at how we structure the restructuring to maybe fit in when maybe you need to have extend a little bit, you know, have it go out 10 years to a certain level, then have a time drop off and maybe go out a little further so that you build in an actual spot where your debt's going down if you needed to do some sort of new money plan. So I think those are good ideas, but ideas we don't necessarily have to implement right now.
I think the impact we can make now, just given what we're capital structure what we're faced with from what's the call, only having 2 call dates, one now and one in 2023, really limits you on this first phase. I think what you're talking about, really probably a phase 2.
No, I agree. I was just curious, you know, because we created the objective, and obviously, whomever is sitting around this table, when phase 2 comes time, with that, you know, with that handcuff.
Yeah, you and I have to revisit that objective, and
I mean, also, I mean, we can't let the past drive things, but these have already been, you know, refinanced and at $100 million in payments in 2013.
What was it, when was phase 2 kicked off?
10/22.
yeah, it would be
October of 2022?
September, October would be
Okay.
So your next term.
yeah the
Sorry, what?
Your next term.
yeah we're showing a series 22. There's a smaller series 20. Like if I look at page 25 and 26, there is actually 2 other bond series, a 21 and a 22. The 21 is the small, about $9 million taxable restructuring of those non-callable bonds. I'm hoping that phase disappears because we're able to deal with that with some cash. So when I'm talking about 2 phases, I'm making the assumption, I guess, that that middle phase disappears because it's, you know, it's relatively small, so you'd be able to take care of that with an escrow defeasance. So that next, so 22 would be about the October 22, September 22. So we'd be probably wanting to have discussions in the spring of that year to start looking at the objectives, give the board plenty of time to examine all its goals so that when the plan is implemented, it meets those long-term goals.
And I don't think I have it in front of me here, but when would our decision need to be made on which option we're looking at by?
So your deadline to, if you're inclined to change the levy, your deadline to implement something would be March 1st of 2020, which means you don't really want to be selling in February, but what if the market is not good in February? So I kind of have in your mind that you want to be selling bonds by about January, no later than January. Keep in mind that once you get past about the first week of December, you don't want to sell in that window because buyers start leaving the market. So if at all possible, if we get things nailed down by October-ish, November-ish, then you could be selling in late November before Thanksgiving. If you need more information and we're not ready to sell in October, November, then I think we should try to sell something in January. If, again, well, likely there's going to be a bond sale regardless of whether you adopt option 1 or option 2 or 3. It's just that the bond sale would just be a straightforward refunding those 2 callable maturities versus a partial restructuring. Because what would likely happen is in that, let's say you choose option 2 or 3, you can see that if you look at page 25, it's about an $8 million bond. But you have more, in this column here, you can see there's still principal remaining on that series. So that principal that's remaining, we would refund for any debt service savings we can capture on that remaining principal. So you'd be selling bonds to refinance that, put it in the right same spot, and then you would be restructuring, pushing out about $8 million of those payments. Okay.
Just because I know this has been defined before, but I couldn't remember how we defined it. How do we define growth rate on page 25?
Oh, the EAV growth rate?
Well, yeah.
So, again, one of the objectives were to focus on the levy.
Right.
So really we focus more on the dollar amount, but leaving it at 0 is not realistic. So then you want to put something in there just to get an idea what the tax rate's going to do, even though we're not focused on it. 3% was chosen just sort of when you look at the prior 40 years, it's
Okay.
sort of that average.
Okay.
But if we had chosen a different percentage, it doesn't really impact the impact of the
No, I
tax.
get that part. I just was trying to
Sure.
do another math earlier and I couldn't quite get it to work. Another obvious question, but I want to make sure I understand it. The quicker if we were to sell a capital asset, the better? Or is there any urgency based on this type of restructuring option?
I don't think it helps because
Which doesn't.
selling it fast, like rushing into a sale to impact the debt, isn't really going to impact phase 1. Because we're going to affect phase 1 with refunding those bonds because we do it on a tax-exempt basis. The sale of that asset I would use towards defeasing payments in those first 40 years, and then using some of that to defease some of those callable bonds. So that escrow will pay a portion of those 40 years of non-callable payments, and then whatever's remaining that didn't need to accomplish the objective would defease and pay off some of those callable bonds on the call date. It may accelerate, so once you have a number, I'll update scenarios, it may accelerate some of the decision what you want it to look like in those later years. Because now you have this cash, and if we're going to apply it to pay down bonds, we need to know which maturities we want it to pay down. But for the first 2 years, it won't impact those whether it occurs before or after that restructuring. I suppose it might make you, like if you're inclined to say, well, let's just let it increase, do phase 1, you may be less inclined to do that if you have the cash on hand, saying, well, hey, let's lower every year now we have this cash. So I guess it's not totally independent. If you're a person that's partial to doing phase one, it might change your mind if you have the cash. Or not phase one, option.
Option. But for us to have that be considered as part of option one, we'd have to have the cash by when?
Well, and that's another reason why we try to push this off to January if at all possible, is because I would say by January-ish, you would need to know, may not have to have it in hand, but I would want to know that you're gonna have it in hand. You know, you guys know schools from time to time are trying to sell property, and sometimes those sales fall through. And then you still don't get the cash you thought you were gonna get, and then that changes the plan. You're not the only school district that happens to, so that happens to others.
So by early first quarter of next year, we'd have to have a pretty concrete sale of that asset for it
Right.
to impact that option. I'm just trying to create a timeline of urgency, if there is any, for anything potentially with that building. That's all. Based on this bond.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, it could be mutually exclusive of this, any decision could be, but.
And I think if you were to have that cash, so when we refinance the bond, whether it's just for savings or savings / restructuring, if that cash were in hand and we were able to apply it and set forth what the final debt restructuring plan would be, that would be a positive credit factor for the rating, which could mean another upgrade. Anything else?
So I think the next steps then would be to, if the board is so inclined to go ahead and move on something this winter, I think probably come back here in October with updated scenarios and kind of make a decision what to do in the short term. Because I believe the board would be, is from what I'm hearing, inclined to at least entertain some sort of restructuring in this winter, correct?
Is that timeframe bid for potential November sale?
November or January,
Yeah,
depending on how you
yeah.
want to
Come
go.
on, October.
You gave us a window either
Yes,
before the holidays
before or
or
after.
after the holidays.
Right. Yeah, I'd say late October.
If we gave a decision, that would still have a November window available.
Yeah, because we know there's gonna be a bond sale, so we can start gearing up documentation, things like that. It's just a matter of what's the bond sale gonna look like.
Anything else, Chris? Yeah, just trying to figure, our November board meeting is, October's the 17th.
Because that's or is it be the
21st.
21st.
Thanksgiving's the following meeting.
Right.
It's late this year. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, it's late, correct.
I mean, the only other benefit would be where the interest rate environment heads between now and then.
Right.
Obviously, the debt market's already reacting, so it's not like we're really waiting for the Fed to step in.
Yeah, maybe in 2 years we can borrow negative interest rates.
Let's hope not.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here's some options. Moving on to the consent agenda, which includes the approval of the regular meeting minutes of August 15, 2019, approval of the closed meeting minutes of August 15, 2019, approval to hold the closed session minute summaries from January 17th through May 16th of 2019, approval of the payroll of August 20th, 2019, out-of-state travel. Does anyone like to have anything pulled from the consent agenda for a discussion? With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Without any further discussion, please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous, the motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to action items, personnel, employment. Hello, Rob.
Hello. Under employment, we have Maria Buck, paraprofessional, Fiona Lee, curriculum clerk, and Timothy Lutz, print room clerk. As the board to approve the employment report as presented.
Can I have a motion, please?
Moved.
A motion, have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Please open the vote.
The vote is open. Vote is unanimous, the motion passes.
Moving on, retirements.
Resignations.
Resignations.
Okay, under resignations, we have Catherine Albano, courtroom clerk, Stephen Ellis, groundskeeper, Matthew Light, athletic director, Brittany Posley, paraprofessional, and Angela Sevick, one-on-one nurse. As board to approve these resignations as presented.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A motion, have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous, the motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on, renewal of Sickich Limited Liability Partnership as Independent Inspector General.
Cover your backup materials, the updated agreement for the Independent Inspector General. Be the administration's recommendation that we continue to work with Sickich as the Independent Inspector General. The hotline is still in place, the email is still in place. Cost rates are very, very similar, if not the same to what they were. It'd be our recommendation to move forward with this agreement.
Thank you. I have a motion to renew the contract as presented.
So moved.
I have a motion, I have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? If you open the vote, please.
The vote is open.
Quad Plus LLC.
One moment.
I'm sorry.
The vote is unanimous, the motion passes.
There's no discussion. Quad Plus LLC project property tax abatements.
Brad, go ahead and give it a read, please.
Yes, in your material there's information from the Will County Department of Economic Development. This is a project where they're asking for a 50% abatement from the school district for 5 years. There's quite a substantial development, approximately consisting of 52,000 square foot of industrial and warehouse, and then Class A facilities of 12,000 square feet of office space. They're anticipating an increase in employees. So they're looking at bringing on, over a 3-year period, approximately 50 full-time employees with the average annual wage of about $87,000. And if you look at the tax abatement that they're requesting, according to their documentation, we'd be looking at, in total, over the 5 years, about $46,000 impact if we went ahead and did the abatement.
So it looks like they're gonna be requesting abatements from several other entities. Do we know if those have occurred?
And I apologize, we have Doug Pryor here, and I forgot your name, sir?
Raymond Palisade.
From
And Quad Plus.
Yeah, I can respond to that.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Doug Pryor from the Will County Center for Economic Development. And on this project, we did make the request to New Lenox District 122, Village of New Lenox, and Will County. All of them have approved the abatement already. This is actually the last one that we're making the formal request to.
Do you have other, the 80 employees now that's in Illinois, is that all at this, or I'm sorry, it's not you, you're not?
Right, so, yeah, the company does have a facility right now located actually just a couple miles west of the new proposed facility. They're keeping that facility and backfilling it. This will be their new headquarters operation. They actually maintain several locations throughout the United States and a couple internationally. This is a new headquarters. They will be moving over 80 existing employees and then adding the additional 50 in this facility.
What's the, you know, you mentioned like the Will County criteria.
Sure.
I mean, what exactly do they have
So,
to meet?
yeah, so the county's abatement application, and I should just clarify, is the Center for Economic Development. We are the county's administrator of this program. You actually have the abatement application in your packet. It's relatively brief, it's 4 pages. And the county's developed a scoring model that weighs these on a variety of metrics, almost all of which are addressed in the application, but it is certainly total dollar investment, property tax generated, job creation, average wage, benefits associated with the job. Let's see, what else is in this? Investment in machinery and equipment within the framework of the facility, and then essentially deal structure. Are they going to own the facility, which in this case they will. And in the case of these abatements scoring, they'll either score in the county's matrix as no abatement or 3, 4, or 5 years at 50%. This one, based largely on the strength of the investment and the type of jobs they're bringing in, did score at the 5-year level. And that same, that 5-year 50 is the same abatement that was carried to a municipality, county, and other school district.
So they have to own the property? And
They don't always have to own the property. We certainly have some where there is a co-agreement between a tenant and a new landlord. They're almost always focused strictly on, and this one is too, new increment created by the project. But they don't necessarily have to own. Again, in this case they will, but if they don't, you're looking for longer term leases in that space.
What can you tell us about the size of this company? Is this a global company? Is this a local company, or?
So they currently operate in 6 domestic facilities. They have facilities in Illinois, Georgia, Minnesota, Texas, Wisconsin, and Indiana. They also have facilities in Turkey and the United Kingdom. Their Illinois footprint today is, again, the staff they have at the site west of here. They actually have recently acquired an engineering company that they're going to move down with them into this one as well. So the Illinois footprint, which houses their corporate leadership, it is going to end up being about that 30 employee number. I actually don't know the global number, right? Do you know that?
For revenue wise?
No, staff.
Staff, it's about close to 300.
Okay.
I'd like to know what the global revenue number is, if you know it.
It ranges, it's about 80 million, 100 million.
They're also considering a site in Houston?
So they have an existing facility in Houston that was under consideration for expansion. This is actually a project that, from a timing standpoint, they've been waiting for these agreements to pass through. I do think that if ultimately everything goes through and they select the Illinois site, we're looking at a relatively quick time frame. I think Northern, who is the builder on this project, would like to do some dirt work this fall, if weather allows for it, and then construction next year.
Joe, you have anything?
I just, quick, is the current facility in this particular taxing body? The one that you're gonna be backfilling, I think was the word?
Actually,
Where is it
I
located?
believe it's in 204, in JTHS's district. In fact, I'm confident it is. It's on the Joliet side of Cherry Hill. I think that's all in 204.
But they're keeping that site
They
correct, so
are.
this would be an additional.
Correct.
And if I'm reading this right, the current land value right now that's being assessed is at 224,000?
I believe,
I think it's page 3 of your presentation. Current EAV, no build scenario, land 224.
yeah,
So
in just land in
Right.
this case.
So then the fair market value of the building would be nearly 2.7.
Right, and that's an estimate based on
understand.
some
I-
comps
yeah.
and hearing it, but Yeah, the deal from an EAV standpoint, because we're improving a vacant land, is additive to EAV from year one.
Got it. And what year is the 5-year start when the completion open, or?
So it'll be the first full year of assessment. So if we have a scenario where they open mid-year, generally the abatement will actually take place the following year when they have a full year assessment.
So now it would probably be 6.5 years out, if they get the discount.
Yeah, that's probably a good estimate. I would assume that you would see this in, tax year 2021. Or 2021 would be the first full year assessment, which would be my expectation.
If their corporate headquarters cover, do you know that if their upper echelon of, do they reside within our district, where they live?
I know that the owner does not. I don't know about your staff.
What was the question?
It wanted to know if your leadership lives within the actual district, within the school district.
No, it's close by. It's, I'm not sure of school districts, but Oak Forest, Orland Park area.
Okay. Any further questions? No? With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve the abatement as presented.
Second.
A motion and a second. All the further discussion, be open to vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous, the motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was worth it, right? I made policy, second reading.
Included in your backup materials are the press updates from June 2019, primarily footnote changes, a couple of the policies where I believe ours was stronger. As I mentioned the last meeting, we stayed with what we have in place. So I just recommend the board approve the updates primarily to the footnotes as presented.
Need a motion to approve footnotes as presented. So moved. Have a motion, have a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? With that, please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous, the motion passes.
Fantastic. Grab your popcorn, grab your candy. Time for 2020 budget presentation.
Right. All right.
We're kind of debating from our board here.
Your favorite part of the night, I'm sure. All right, so I just wanted to update you with the questions and research that was asked from the last meeting, and then if there's any other questions, we'll certainly can answer those or get them down. Okay. All right, so the first question was what are the assumptions made in the tax levy collection? So this table here represents the assumptions. So in the long run, the last 7 years, average collection was 51.71% in the first part of the year. So remember, we collect taxes May and June, and then September, really. So that splits our fiscal year. So the long run is about 51.17% in the pre and early taxes. The average uncollectible has ran about 0.34%. So you can see here on the screen, so we have actual, so it's 17, oh, I shouldn't give up my finger. Oh, that's a problem, it's off. I turned it on. Yeah. Anyway, so with that being said, so the actual collection, we've talked about this a lot. We had a really strong collection for 17 levy at the beginning of the year because of the SALT. Everybody knew our state and local taxes were going to be limited, so they jumped in and paid early. So we had an unusual high, 52.89%. That then had an impact on the next year, the next fiscal year 19, it drops it down to 46.97. Now for this year, for levy year 18, we already collected for 19, our actual, we had 51.88, kind of in line with where we see normally, but remember, these are big numbers, so a small, like, a little bit does make a big change, about 100 million, total levy. So then for 18, we have estimated in the 2020 year, the remaining is 47.78. Now, the rest we have to estimate for the 20 is the 19, first part of the 19 levy. So we have that estimated in there, that average, that 51.2. Simple math is give 48.6 is the long range on the other, and we have in there 0.34 for uncollectibles. Okay, so really historical numbers.
So in the actual budget, did you take did you carry this out by fund and take the actual tax rates for each that were levied for each of the underlying funds and apply these numbers to it?
No. So the way it works when you get down, so this is the global, the big number. We levy by number, not by rate, so dollars collection. Then, when it comes to applying it to each individual fund, we just apply it based on what that fund needs to balance, if you will. So we start out, there's only, and with the law change in the property tax extension limit law, you now kind of look at it as more of a global number than a per fund number. So you've got your limit that you can't go over, and we basically start with tort and work our way back to the ed fund. So ed fund is, and that's the way we do with new property growth too. So tort through O&M, the smaller funds, they're set. We won't make any adjustment on those if we say we had more growth or less growth than we expected of new property. What we'll do is that final adjustment will be tweaked in the ed fund, because that's by far the largest.
That's where I noticed the biggest difference.
Right. So it's pretty much always in the ed fund where we end up tweaking. Okay. Any questions on the levy then, on the assumption? Aha. Okay. I did pass the IQ test. All right, the second question was, could you please provide a comparison summary of the FY 2020 budget summaries and the changes in assumptions as presented to the Board of Education? So, we had 3 different scenarios that were presented, or times, I shouldn't say scenarios, it's as the budget was being developed and things were changing, more knowns. So we initially presented February 21st of 19, that's the first column. Second column. First column says FY19 actual. Now that's the first time that showed up on this report, but I thought it was important since before we always had 18 actual and 19 budget. Now I'm throwing there 19 actual. So we had our February 21, we had our first presentation. Then we came back June 20, after we're getting close to the fiscal year end and getting staffing pretty much rounded up. And then finally, we came back August 15th with the actual budget. So what I show there in the change column is from the first presentation of February 21 to August 15th. So now let's just, and in your packet of information is the more detailed by fund analysis for your review. But let's just kind of walk through this a little bit here. So first off, we had tax levy change. Why the tax levy change? Nothing to do with new growth estimates or anything like that, strictly to do with those collections. So as we collected more in the other, we had to adjust. So we got that levy, we got that leveled out where we think we're going to be, and it's really on the historic. Corporate personal property tax replacement, that's really based on the actual. So, and what we're being signaled, we don't think that's gonna change. So we got 603, so we're budgeting for 604. Investment income, we're estimating higher cash balances. We had a $6 million operating surplus, 2.7 million overall, so that's more money in the bank, and expected stable investment rates. Okay, maybe they're gonna be slightly down, I don't know. But we're projected stable. All right, okay, admissions and student fees. Well, really, what really changed there was we added in the 120K from AP exams, which really used to be in student activities, and we know we're bringing them on to the general ledger side. The biggest one is the 611, and this is the offsetting revenue. This is because we're paying more people through payroll, and then money's collected through student activities and reimbursed to the district. And then finally, we're with more additional revenue, projecting more additional revenue from our athletic departments. Finally, food sales, that's just based on actual. We sold 2.3 million. We think we can do it again this next year, so we increased it. Elementary and District 843 payments, it's just based on the future costs, where we think that's going to be, plus the new 2.76% administrative fee. So we have those going up. Then finally, other local, going up 300,000. Well, it's really the biggest part of that was that 300,000 one-time funds of the AP exam, where we've been charging slightly more than the exam cost, built up over time. We're rolling that into the district. And then 117,000 in booster donations. Before those recorded in student activity, now they're on the general ledger. And then we had some other minor reductions. Finally, evidence-based funding. Well, we based it on FY19 award plus 5%, and we know we're we're only 47,000 off of that number. So turned out to be a great projection, 421,000 increase. And then finally, we need an other state. We have our mandatory categoricals, and we're budgeting for 4 full payments, and then adding the 250,000 DCEO grant, because we didn't get it in the last fiscal year, so now we're budgeting for it, and we have the expenditure on the budget for it also. Federal, we're budgeted for it flat. Overall, 1.9 million increase, or 1.72% in the overall revenue. Expenditures. So from the first estimated budget projection from February 21st to August 18th, expenditure budget has increased by 1.8%, or 1.942 million, or 1.9 million basically. The overall, you can see here, so starting on our staffing plan, we really pulled it together where we had everybody, so we could decrease that by 340,000 from our initial estimates, and it's based on our actuals. Same way with our benefits, we're able to reduce those down a little. Finally, we needed to increase athletics because of the 117,000 for the donation from the boosters, and then the additional revenue they're collecting, we did allow them some additional allocation for uniforms, etc. Finally, music equipment, we were able to restore the initial $40,000 that we thought we were going to have to cut, but in the end we didn't have to. Special ed tuition, this has been the hardest for us. Actual came in at 5.2 million, so we've got it now at 5 million. So we had to come up 750,000. This is due to actual higher than expected increases. Curriculum, this is just strictly the adding in of the 310,000 for the AP exams, which now is on the general ledger. Debt service, no change. District 843, well, everything came in higher, so we needed to increase our budget, so that came up by 254. Capital expenditures, we needed to add in the DEOC grant, plus restore some cuts we thought we were going to have to make there, so it went up by 375. And then finally, all other changes was 689,000. That was restoring previous cuts of 200,000, adding in for, leaving the Pepsi contract where we need to bring in our own refrigerators, which will save us in the long run $133,000. We needed to buy fridges, SRO overtime, $64,000, and E-rate funding of $153,000. Here again, we're getting revenue on the other side, expenditures. There's two different methods. We're actually doing the reimbursement back to us with one of the vendors, so we had to include the expenditures and revenue.
The summer activity salaries.
Yes.
That were added.
Yes,
That was added into the education fund 10.
Yes, they're in Fund 10.
What was the, do you recall what the average annual increase was for the teachers in this coming school year, like percentage? I mean, you can get it.
Let me write that down. I want to say a number because I'll say it and then I'll be wrong, but let me.
That's just one of the things I'm having a hard time reconciling is we as this budget's been developed, especially in the ed fund, the salaries have come down. And yet one of the offsets now is an increase to salaries of 600,000, so it's only, I don't know, 10.1% or something, but.
Right.
I'm just trying to.
Yeah, well,
Are there less, I mean, and it could be, maybe I just don't know, the staffing plan might be a decrease in the number of employees.
Well, we have, it's pretty stable, but I have a summary. I put down here my notes, salary summary. I'll include that for our next discussion. Let's see, so overall estimated net all funds surplus increased by 25,000 to 5.9 million, while the estimated net operating fund surplus decreased by 98,000 to 2.8 million, or 3% of expenditures per BOE policy 420. So we're right at that 3% surplus threshold for the operating funds.
Brad, I have a quick question. Can you go back just one slide?
Revenue?
Yeah. If we have revenue?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the likelihood of collection of all those revenue streams?
Oh, very strong.
I know, but I mean, if you had to say which was the weakest and which one was the
Well, obviously the weakest is interest income.
Okay, but that's the smallest.
Okay, well, taxes, we got a 0.34.
Okay, so that's 99.7.
Right, which is 76% of our revenue.
Okay.
Okay, evidence-based funding, the one place the state of Illinois has never defaulted on.
Okay.
So that's very good. That coming in at 8 million, so that's a pretty good chunk.
Which one worries you?
Which one worries me? Well, obviously the very first one that worries me the most would be, do we really get 4 categorical payments? It's easy if you remember 5 years ago now, I guess, state just flat out didn't pay. We only got 2 that year. That's, then the next year they paid 2 from the prior year and only 1 from the current year. So then we got 3. Everyone thought, yay, 3. Wait, there was only 1 from the current year. So then the next year, and so we're finally, they still owe us money from last year. So when I say I'm budgeting for 4 full payments, I'm budgeting for 1 from last year and 3 for this year.
What is the estimated payment amount?
Oh, per each one?
Ballpark.
Ballpark. So it's like 100-some thousand in transportation and about 100 and something in, it's about 250.
So if they miss a payment, that would be a $250,000
Right.
reduction in revenue. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's probably the biggest. Of course, all these other increases, we're talking about, they're right, they're documented. A lot of these are expenditure revenue offsets,
That's what I was trying to net against.
Yes, I got a slide for that.
Okay. But that's what I just wanted to understand where the revenue variable may be, because at board 420, that number's pretty tight.
Yeah.
It's not gonna leave a lot of wiggle.
Yeah, that is correct. And if you look at our expenditure budget last year, I think we're 340,000 under budget. you know, not a lot. So this is where, you know, administration will have to work hard to, like we did last year, control the budget and make sure we come in, you know, hopefully a little under, and, you know, make sure revenues. Now, I will say our revenue budget, I feel like is tighter and more realistic. Like last year's revenue budget, we were still shaking everything out when we got, and so there was some room. I mean, evidence-based funding, we weren't sure what we're gonna get. And we ended up getting, you know, quite a bit more. Go ahead, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, I mean, I'll agree with that. It's the revenue side is tighter. I just think it's gonna be harder on the expense side to squeeze anything out, because if you look at it, expenditures are increasing overall in the operating funds about 2.1 million, and you have to remember we're moving all those capital projects, which have already been done, so there's no room there. $3.8 million roughly is coming out of the operating fund. So I mean, you had to already come up with about, you know, moving around like 1.6 million.
This doesn't hit.
Right.
There's no room, no real room. I mean, maybe a couple tubas or something, but I mean, you'd be suffering to try and find a six-figure number real quick. Does the other side include the benefit holiday as well?
Yes. So it does. It includes benefit holiday in that.
So that's already baked into that.
Right. Which for our latest, we're about 7.2 million in reserves in that. Other questions? All right.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were done.
Oh, no, got enough more, couple more. Okay, so the third question that was asked, and I think Bob Lewis kind of already nailed on this a little, but I have a nice little graphic, but it says how far in advance does the district levy debt service payments? Okay, so this is the debt service levy chart. So basically, imagine now, this is statutorial. We set our 18 levy well before that, but by law, you have to set it by the last Tuesday in December, so it's the 21st of December. You had to set your 18 levy. This is the fiscal year in which it gets collected. So May and June, we collected 51.88%, and September and October, we collected this. Well, where's the payments? Well, you're going with an interest-only payment, which we make July 1st, which we collected right here, so that's only a few months, or a month and a half, really. No, what am I saying? 20 days. So that's really quick. This is where it's a little longer. So you're picking up the levy here, and you're not spending it out until 6 months later. So, yeah. So, anyway, it's a little in advance. It's not as far in advance as we might think. I think one reason why people think it's quite far is because you always talk about the 18 levy. Well, the 18 levy is using to pay the 20. And it sounds like, oh, 18 levies using to pay the 20 debt service. Well, yeah, but we levy a year in arrears. So it's not really, it's really the 18 levy, which is collected in calendar year 19, which then is used to pay debt service in 20. So that's the answer. And then finally, we already alluded to this a little bit, but could you please provide a detail of the offsetting revenue with the related expenditures? So the top half of this chart is probably the most relevant. Because it's the changes in this budget. So let's start. So in the Ed Fund, we have AP exam fees of $420,000 of revenue. In Cost Center, that's with the hashtag 58, Cost Center 58 curriculum, we have supplies going up by $385,000, 1-to-1 there. Then in the Ed Fund and IMREF, we have summer camp revenues being $611,000. It's for reimbursement of salaries of $488 and benefits of $123. Then in Ed Fund, we have E-rate funding of $140,000. That's really in Cost Center 61, and it's in various budget line items, but it's $140,000. Then in the Ed Fund, we have booster donation revenue of $117. That's found in Cost Center 36, which is athletics, and it's in various line items. Then finally, maintenance and operations, we have the DCEO grant of $250,000, and that's in capital projects, 1-to-1. Then, if you look at the more global picture, we have in Ed Fund, we have the Illinois State with mandatory categoricals, $850,000. That's really a reimbursement in cost center 19 special ed tuition, which right now we're spending about $2.45 million in that. And that's the reimbursement. We talked last time about it's 2 times our per capita spending. So $850,000 in revenue, $2.4 million of expenditures. Then you have evidence-based funding, $8.3 million. That's really regular ed, special ed, English language, and low income. That is funded, ear tag for that, and it's $8.3 million. Then you have transportation, which is state transportation, special ed aid, $927,000. That's really a direct correlation reimbursement for the District 843 special ed transportation payment of $1.4 million. So out of $1.4 million in expenditures, we get $927,000 back. Finally, in transportation and IMRF, we have the elementary payments where we transport our feeder districts. We collect about $1.53 million in revenue, and we spend about $5.1 million. The difference is this new 2.76% administrative fee. And with that, I'm ready for those questions.
So the special ed increase,
Yes.
it's about 20%, 21%. I mean, is this something unique happening this year to in our specific case, or is this something happening like statewide, or?
Well, I think it's twofold at least. One, the state did mid-year last year approve a statewide tuition increase for the outplacements. The state regulates that, so they set the daily rate. That's the first thing. The second thing, and the biggest thing that's hitting us, is our budget was not in line or realistic with our outplaced enrollments. So if you remember, that's one of the largest budget variances we had in FY19, 700 and some thousand. So we had to plug that hole and coming back with a realistic budget amount for what we needed to fund those outplacements.
So I guess I should look at what is this an increase over actual 2019 then?
I don't have that in front of me, but I'll document that in one of the questions. So actual increase.
Scott, on this particular subject, we talked about taking a look at this particular subject.
We are, we're gonna we've already started the process of taking a closer look at our special ed expenditures to see if we can tighten those up a little bit. Laura's done an outstanding job. She just completed her first year, starting her second. So we know this budget going in this year is gonna account for all those students that we currently have placed out, and even some funds for those that we know eventually will be. But we are gonna look at looking at all of our programs to see if there are cost savings while at the same time providing better opportunities.
So actually the fiscal year 2019 actual was 5.2, almost 5.3 million. So we're actually budgeting less.
Correct, yeah.
Now. So we don't think it's gonna match last year's, or?
I'll take a closer look at that. I couldn't answer that right off.
I think last year, we paid some that had carried over.
Right.
Plus we paid on time to close the year, Chris. So I don't think we'll have carryover. I don't think we had carryover this fiscal year, but we'll go through and confirm that.
So the going to purchase services and expenditures, and the explanation is reduction in property insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And we're reducing our purchase services, and maybe part of it's offset by my next question, but by over 48%, and it's like 334,000. How much of that is actually property insurance, and do we know that number for a fact right now?
Right. So the most of it is property insurance. So there's a couple of things happening with property insurance. First, we're getting better information from our carrier on how much is transportation, how much is buildings, how much is liability, whatever. So, for whatever the reason, in prior years, when I came here, I just, here was the total bill we're getting. I pretty much just allocated it across the funds based on the prior person. Right or wrong, that's what I did. Now, I get a very detailed breakdown from the collect that says, okay, this much is, transportation fund 40, this much of your bill is fund 80, this much of your bill is fund 20. They really do a great job breaking it down by the different tax levies that are legally accessible to us. So a little of that, what you're seeing is there's a difference in different funds. And then we're also, we're saving money on our overall insurance too.
And then I'm just looking at some of these utilities and the supplies.
You're looking at the detailed report by fund?
I'm sorry, yes. Yeah, where are you at? I'm sorry, I don't know. They don't have page numbers on it.
Yeah.
Expenditures, the detailed report on their expenditures.
On the expenditures? Which fund?
Fund 20.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, actually. So just looking at supplies and then some of the utilities up over 27%, 22%. Are those based on just actual what happened in 2019, or is there some other reason for those to increase that much?
Well, yeah, some of it's based on that. I mean, I just worked with Mr. Wilkie to go through the budget and analyze that. Some of it's removing or replacing some of the cuts that we thought we were going to need to do. So, like for example, the supplies, we spent $862 last year. This year we're at $835. We're just have to continue to work to hold the line. Overall, I believe Fund 20 was slightly over budget last year, but pretty darn close to on budget. So, they work hard as if one area, is up or down, they work hard to balance it somewhere else. You can see one of the areas we did restore back cuts is on our natural gas. And natural gas is a tough one because it just really, we fluctuate on the market, spot gas with hedging on our storage. So we have a good amount stored at like 30-cent gas. So depends on where we hit in the winter, how much we'll need to take off of storage versus spot purchasing.
And it looks like we restored some of the technology budget as well.
Yes, we restored all of it.
Is most of that's already allocated?
What's that?
Is a lot of that we put back in already allocated from things we approved at the end of last year?
Well, yeah.
In the tech budget.
Right, so some of these reductions that have been put back, they are allocated out to the departments, and so the departments would have had to be making cuts. Now they won't have to make those reductions.
This is just on the expenditures under Fund 10. It starts salaries, benefits, and then it has LWC, LWE, LWN, 193. Are those, and there's a note in driver, is that all the driver's ed expense?
Right, so those, yeah, so you're looking at those departments. So 100 LWC, that's central principal, that's their main building budget. So you can see there that for LWC, the principal's got $228,000 for all of their building operator, their supplies, material, and within part of that is the driver's education department, which they need to pay for fuel. And so we increased, you can see there the change, and it was, we added more cost for fuel for driver's education.
3%.
Tied with the 3%, correct.
If you just hypothetically started thinking about like a contingency A, contingency B, if something kind of goes sideways.
We've discussed that. There's not, obviously, there's not a lot of room. However, some of the expenditures that we have slated kind of for technology.
You don't have to give us the detail now.
Yes, the discussions have already taken
Right.
place. It is tight,
Okay.
and you're right. If we don't receive the revenue, there are not several levers, as we've discussed before, to pull. However, there are a few. If we are short down, if we're short $250,000 here, we will be able, in the last 6 months, to adjust.
But, you know, I will just remind the board, one of the difficulties, and this is why we have TAWs, is, you know, we collect about 42% of our revenue in the last month of the fiscal year. So sometimes, you know, it's tough to predict where we're actually, you know, hitting. Just remind the board of that things like interest income, well, that's, you know, we can predict that. We got a good pattern of how that's coming in. I should be able to tell you right off, you know, how things are going. But some of that other stuff, it's a little harder, you know. But the positive news, you know, about 80% of our revenue, other than how much we're gonna have one way or the other on the split on the taxes, is pretty guaranteed. So while we collect 40-some% in the last month, it's, you know, 0.34% delinquency rate, pretty darn good. Probably one of the highest. I bet if you did an Illinois poll, it's probably gonna be one of the highest there is. The worst thing that can happen is we might collect a little less in 1 year, well, we're gonna get it the next year. So we have to keep that in mind. If we did have a, you know, swing in our taxes a little one way or the other, just know it could be in the next year. So we would balance it out that way too.
Which you do have that swing this year. I mean, you got a $700,000 timing difference in tax collection right off the top.
Right, but we're on that historical range, so
I understand.
we should be. But that, you know, that's, you know, just who pays in May and who pays, you know.
I understand.
All right.
I think reconciling that special ed thing is gonna kind of be important.
Yep, we'll be able to do that.
10% missed there.
Right, okay, got that noted. If anything else, the sooner you can email me, the sooner I can put this together. We'll be back here for September, looking for the board to vote on it. Legally, we will need to pass a budget before the 30th of September, so unless you want an emergency meeting, recommend we come prepared to vote.
Real quickly, because it is a budget item, have you just started any discussion with the TAWS agreement for this fiscal year?
Absolutely, yeah, so we're well underway on that. Already have met with one bank, be working, so magic key with that, I think it's September 18th, feds are scheduled to meet. Market says there's a 100% chance it's gonna be a 25 basis points down. That's great for our TAWs. So we will in earnest begin negotiations on September 20th. And then we'll have everything ready to talk to the board on that October meeting, and then we'll come back at the November meeting and pull the trigger on that. We'll close in December. Reason why is just in case. We're projecting we won't need any TAWs until February, but you wouldn't want something like the state not to send us a payment that we're planning, and next thing you know, we need a little. So we'll have that lined up well in advance. Okay, email me sooner than later, and I look forward to seeing you in September.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Brad. Moving on, informational items. Report of the 843 Special Education Governing Board meeting from July 23rd.
At our meeting this past Tuesday, I'm terrible to report, the school's gotten underway. We're going to be coming back next month on mainly one issue. I think the next date is September 10th.
Was fun being Secretary Pro Tem?
It was taxing.
Excellent. Community relations.
Community relations report is in your backup materials for your review.
Asset of the month.
September asset of the month is commitment to learning, connection, and commitment to school. Young person is actively engaged in learning. Talk with your children about school and learning. I was able to make it to 2 of the campuses last night for back to school night. If you did not get a parking place at Central or West, and the same I know was true for East, so parents very involved. It was really encouraging to see. And then at school, conduct an interest survey at the start of the school year, and the community offer enjoyable, meaningful, intellectually challenging trips, lectures, of the like.
Superintendent's district report.
District report, I did include the Alliance legislative report for your review, some of the bills that the governor did sign into action. The one impacting us will be the threat assessment team, which we've already convened in each of our buildings. So that will have up and running. The minimum teacher pay does not impact us at this time. We are above the minimum. That's a significant impact to Central and Southern Illinois school districts who currently are not up to that rate, but that's in place. Also to report, I'll be over the next week walking some different state agencies through Lincoln Way North. We have not heard back from Rich Township since our tours 2 weeks ago. So I've not heard back from their superintendent since the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday tours. But continue to talk with different state agencies, and we'll see if this moves forward.
Any other district business to discuss this evening? I don't believe you have any correspondence? No. Well, there's no closed session this evening, so without any further discussion, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All right, I got a motion and a second.
All in favor?
Anyone opposed? Meeting is adjourned.